going to be presenting on Aspira of New York versus the Board of Education of the City of New York. Before I talk about that case, just a little historical backdrop. In 1917, Puerto Rico became a Commonwealth of the United States. What this meant was that every Puerto Rican became a citizen of the United States. In the 1940s and 1950s, Santiago says that assimilationist policies dominated decision-making for Puerto Ricans and other Hispanics in the US. This also applied to the field of education. One example of this is the Program of Education for Puerto Rican Migrants in 1954, proposed by Mariano Villaronga. He proposed intensifying teaching for Puerto Ricans in mainland United States. This would consist of systematic practice in hearing, speaking, reading, and writing in English. And this program also proposed and in fact facilitated English lesson broadcasts to residents of Puerto Rico. During this time of the court case between the Board of Education and Aspira, educators were concerned that Puerto Ricans were treated as immigrants or foreigners in New York City schools, when in fact they were citizens. In 1970, when this case was being prepared, more than 250,000 underachieving Puerto Rican children were in New York City schools. Also in the 1970s, Puerto Rican children had high dropout rates, low college admission and completion rates. And despite attempts of Puerto Rican groups to remedy this, there was no remedy, and schools were not giving equal education to bilingual students to that of their monolingual peers. And this was demonstrated by the fact that all instruction was in English, apart from a 1-hour ESL class per day. And so enters Aspira of New York and the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund on behalf of 80,000 plaintiff children against the Board of Education of the City of New York. And they sued the Board of Education of the City of New York to obtain equal education opportunity for children with limited English proficiency, and also to obtain special educational services for these for underachieving students who are bilingual. The former they achieved, and the second, the latter, they did not. This court case resulted in a consent decree which required transitional bilingual education programs in New York City schools. It required them to intensify English language instruction and instruction of subject matter in Spanish. It required Spanish language instruction itself and integration of CD program students to the rest of the population to prevent isolation. Some of the negative outcomes, at least one of them I see, is that in 1975, when Spanish surname students were tested using the language assessment battery, which was a determinant of their entry into the CD program, if they tested better in English than in Spanish, because they were required to take both tests, they were not allowed entry into the program. And this left out many bilingual individuals who perhaps needed these resources. The positive outcomes, despite the fact that Santiago suggests it's impossible to determine the success of this court case, I believe is that despite great opposition, it forced New York City schools into a higher level of accountability to their students and families. And as a result, many bilingual students have been awarded a higher level of education. What is its relevance for today? Well, Santiago says that the most frequent point of entry continues to be New York City for Puerto Ricans. And this court case relates to all Spanish-speaking individuals. What I believe the legacy it leaves behind is this continued discussion about equal services to citizens of the United States, whether they be from Puerto Rico or mainland United States. And these are my sources.